In 1917, the Socialist Bolshevik Party seized the Russian Provisional Government in the October Revolution. This was a reaction to unfairly long working hours and poor workplace conditions in Russian farms and factories. Once in power, the Bolsheviks worked to build a centralized communist government. They also passed a few sets of legislative reforms. But eventually, the good times ended. Joseph Stalin, an oppressive dictator, took power in the Soviet Union. Even though the October Revolution was well intentioned, the Bolsheviks succumbed to power and greed. There were some advancements, but all of them were at the expense of the people. This left the common man oppressed and behind, just as they were before. Russia in the early 1900s was a ravaged country. The nation was being ruled by Tsar Nicholas II of the Romanov dynasty, and the situation was atrocious for the citizens. The monarchy had been torturing the Russian working class, known as the proletariat, stripping them of their basic rights. The proletariat class was the lowest paid in all of Europe at the time, in a country where over 85% of the population were farmers. Due to these issues, the tensions between the monarchy and the proletariat were building. But the Tsar ignored the plights of his people. He was an incapable ruler who made problematic decisions. In 1914, World War I began. The Tsar's decision to fight in the war worsened the Russian situation. Food and resources were being diverted to the soldiers at the front lines, starving the population. Almost 2.5 million Russian soldiers were killed, and nearly 4 million were captured. The people were extremely unhappy, further increasing the tensions between the working class and the monarchy. To motivate the Russian soldiers, the Tsar went to the front lines. This also turned out to be a disaster, as the Tsar had a lack of military experience, resulting in major losses in territory and personnel. Along with the war, protests kept occurring due to the continued mistreatment of the peasants. Eventually, the protests in Russia escalated so much that the Tsar was forced to abdicate in February of 1917. To replace the monarchy, a provisional government was installed under the leadership of Alexander Kerensky. However, the people had issues with the new government, as the government decided to keep fighting in the war. The people formed a council in Petrograd, formerly St. Petersburg. These councils, known as Soviets, held public meetings where speakers would criticize government actions. In April of 1917, Vladimir Lenin, the leader of the Bolshevik Party, came out of exile and returned to Russia. Lenin then gave a speech to appeal to the oppressed Russian people. Lenin promised more power to the working class and equal wealth distribution. He painted a world where no major government decision is taken without the consent of the people, and a complete rejection of capitalist interests. This was Lenin's call to the people to join the Bolsheviks in their fight against injustice.
What are their long-term goals? What are the means of getting there? Because the means and the ends obviously are connected. And big circumstances are there's a war in 1917. World War I didn't end. They had to deal with that. There is great poverty in the country. It's a majority peasant country, not a worker country. And then comes the Civil War.
In June of 1917, the government led the Kerensky Offensive to limit Austro-Hungarian power in Eastern Europe. The offensive initially had some successes, but eventually failed. This sparked the July Days, a massive backlash of unrest supported by the Bolsheviks. In August of 1917, Russian General Laver Kornilov planned to seize Petrograd, claiming that he was attempting to crush the socialist movement there. Kerensky discovered Kornilov's plans and quickly marked him as a traitor attempting a coup. This heavily divided the government. The Bolsheviks slowly started gaining more influence in the Petrograd Soviet, and they started forming plans to overthrow the government. On October 25th, 1917, the Bolsheviks proceeded to storm the Winter Palace, which is weakly defended. At night, the attack started, and with minimal fighting, the palace was taken over. The revolution had succeeded. The provisional government has been deposed. The cause for which the people have fought, namely the immediate offer of a democratic peace, the abolition of landed proprietorship, workers' control over production, and the establishment of Soviet power. This cause has been secured. Long live the revolution of workers, soldiers, and peasants. One of the most immediate reactions of the October Revolution was the Russian Civil War. The war started in 1918 and was fought between the Red and White armies. The Red Army was made up of the supporters of the Bolsheviks, and the White Army was made up of Tsarist and capitalist forces. In the Civil War, more than 5 million civilians were killed. The White Army had advantages like foreign aid from Western nations, experienced commanders, and a large control over Russia. However, they had disadvantages that led to the Red Army's victory, like a lack of centralization and minimal support from the Russian people. In 1922, the Red Army won and established the Soviet Union. However, a consequence of the Civil War was the massive economic crash that followed, causing more problems. The Bolsheviks, with good intentions, passed some reforms to help the peasants, supporting their ideology of wealth distribution.
In the countryside, peasants were given land, and they were given land in the most bold way. They basically gave peasants the land that they controlled.
The reforms stopped when Joseph Stalin and dictatorial leader came into power. He unjustly killed many people, created famines, and oppressed the Russians. This worsened the situation even more. The Bolsheviks ended up compromising the welfare of the people for their own power and greed. The hopes of being free from oppression and torture were slowly but surely crushed.
Because the Bolsheviks have that nationalized everything. They basically took everything they could take, and people began to starve. There was no fuel, there was no electricity. It was just a nightmare.
The impacts of the October Revolution still are visible today. Russia is currently ruled by Vladimir Putin, a dictatorial leader who rules like a tyrant and crushes opposition, just like what Joseph Stalin and the Romanovs did. The Bolsheviks claimed to flip the social hierarchy around, promoting the average proletariat, but in reality, they just replaced the Tsar and did nothing else. We learned that nothing has changed for the citizens of Russia. They remain where they were 100 years ago, oppressed, mistreated, and undervalued. George Orwell, a famous English writer, describes this situation in his novella, Animal Farm. In the novella, the humans are the Romanovs, the pigs are the Bolsheviks, and the other farm animals are the Russian people. They were all alike. The creatures outside looked from pig to man and from man to pig. It was impossible to say which was which. In the end, the October Revolution was a reaction against a government that oppressed the people. But when the revolution sparked, the reforms failed to help the common man any way whatsoever. The power did not go to the Russian citizen. It only switched hands. Sometimes revolutions do fail.